A powerful billionaire's life is shattered when he discovers he has a hidden son, setting off a thrilling journey of secrets, danger, and a fight to protect what truly matters. Stay with us to uncover a story you won't be able to stop listening to. Ethan Sinclair stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city pulse with life far below. The skyline stretched endlessly, dotted with the landmarks that bore his name: Sinclair Towers, Sinclair Plaza, Sinclair International. His business empire was colossal, dominating industries from finance to real estate, technology to luxury goods. To the world, Ethan was the embodiment of success, ruthless, efficient, and unyielding. He wore power like a second skin, his tailored suits and crisp demeanor leaving no room for weakness. Those who knew him, if anyone could truly claim to know him, whispered about his relentless ambition and his uncanny ability to turn anything into gold. Deals that others deemed impossible, Ethan sealed with a signature and a subtle, knowing smile. But with every achievement, he had distanced himself from human connections, sealing off emotions as if they were a liability. Tonight, as he surveyed the city, he felt a rare twinge of unease. His closest advisor, Lucas Crane, had noticed it too: Ethan's recent restlessness, the way he lingered in silence after meetings. Perhaps it was the anniversary of his first big deal, a reminder of the path he chose: power over people, ambition over affection. Just as Ethan turned away from the window, his secretary's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, a letter just arrived for you. It's marked personal and urgent." He frowned. Personal? Urgent? No one contacted him this way. Curious, he instructed her to bring it in. When the sleek black envelope was placed on his desk, he hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten note, the ink neat and deliberate. "You have a son. His name is Alex. He needs you. Come find him before it's too late." Ethan's hands tightened around the paper. A son? Impossible. His mind raced, grasping at the reality of the words. Who would send such a letter? Was it a ploy, a blackmail attempt? But there was no demand, just a statement that threatened to upend his entire life. As he scanned the note again, a photograph slipped from the envelope. It was a boy, around 12, with striking blue eyes, Ethan's eyes. The world seemed to tilt. Ethan's carefully constructed empire, built on control, precision, and detachment, was suddenly and inexplicably on the verge of collapse. Ethan sat back in his leather chair, the sleek, modern lines of his office suddenly feeling constricting. He stared at the photograph in his hand, his mind racing to connect the fragments of his past. The boy in the picture had his sharp jawline, the same piercing blue eyes that had intimidated countless boardrooms. Yet, there was something softer in the boy's gaze, a spark of innocence that Ethan had long since lost. He turned the photograph over, searching for any clue, but the back was blank. Just the face of a young boy, his face, staring back at him. Ethan's pulse quickened, a rare crack in his otherwise impenetrable composure. The note had been written in neat, deliberate handwriting, with no hint of desperation or plea for money. Just a simple, staggering truth. "You have a son." The words echoed in his mind, clashing violently with his carefully ordered reality. Ethan had never wanted children. He had no time for them, no patience for the messiness of emotions and attachments. His life had been about control, precision, and relentless focus, values he had clung to since his youth, when he clawed his way up from the slums to the towering heights of power. Ethan leaned forward, opening the sleek metal drawer on his desk. Inside was a secure phone, one known only to his closest associates. He punched in a familiar number. "Lucas," he said as soon as the line connected. His voice was low, his tone sharp. "I need you to look into something." Lucas Crane, his head of private security and longtime confidant, had seen Ethan at his most ruthless. He was a former intelligence officer, a man known for his discretion and unwavering loyalty. If anyone could unravel this mystery, it was Lucas. "Of course, Mr. Sinclair," Lucas replied, his tone calm despite the late hour. "What's the situation?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've received information. Personal. I need you to find out if it's true." There was a pause on the other end. Lucas knew better than to probe without permission. "Understood. I'll begin immediately. Send me the details." Ethan looked again at the boy's face. A son. The concept felt foreign, like a language he had never bothered to learn. Yet, as he ended the call and placed the photograph carefully back into the envelope, a deep, unsettling feeling took hold. For the first time in decades, Ethan felt the sting of uncertainty. His perfectly controlled world, his meticulously built empire, suddenly felt fragile, like a glass tower swaying in a storm. Ethan Sinclair found himself pacing the polished marble floors of his penthouse, the usually soothing sound of his footsteps against the cold, hard surface doing little to calm his racing mind. The mysterious letter sat on his desk, the photograph of the boy still peeking out, his intense blue eyes seeming to follow Ethan's every move. The envelope's stark, black edge felt like a line he had crossed, pulling him back into a past he had long buried beneath towering skyscrapers and relentless boardroom battles. It had been years since he had allowed himself to think about that chapter of his life. Back when he was a young, hungry entrepreneur, still fighting to carve out a name in the cutthroat world of finance. Before the jets, the glass towers, and the whispered respect of boardroom titans, there had been a time when Ethan was simply a man in love. Her name had been Lila Hart, a fierce, passionate artist with a fire in her eyes that matched his own. She had painted the world in vibrant, sweeping strokes, finding beauty in the chaos that Ethan had spent his life trying to tame. They had met at a gallery opening, an event he had attended reluctantly, dragged by a friend who insisted he needed to loosen up and experience life beyond spreadsheets and market analyses. Ethan had been about to leave when he caught sight of Lila, standing before one of her own canvases, her hands stained with paint, her eyes alight with creative energy. Something about her had shattered his defenses in an instant. She had challenged him, drawn him out of his carefully constructed shell, making him question the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had been willing to endure for power and success. For the first time in his life, he had allowed himself to feel, to dream of a world beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. But ambition had a way of consuming everything in its path. As Ethan's business empire grew, so did the distance between them. Lila, with her free spirit and chaotic creativity, had become a painful reminder of the man he once hoped to be, a version of himself he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of power. Their passionate romance had ended as abruptly as it had begun, torn apart by late nights, missed calls, and the cold, unyielding demands of his growing empire. He had not seen or heard from her in over a decade. Yet now, this letter, this boy, threatened to unravel the life he had built from the ashes of their failed love. Snapping back to the present, Ethan reached for his phone and pulled up Lucas Crane's number once more. This time, his voice was sharper, more focused. "Lucas, it's me again. I need you to dig deeper. I want every detail on Lila Hart. Where she's been, who she's been with, what she's been doing for the past 13 years. And if she has a child." He hesitated, the words sticking in his throat like shards of broken glass. "I need to know if this boy is mine." Lucas didn't miss a beat. "Understood, Mr. Sinclair. I'll prioritize this." Ethan ended the call, his mind churning. He stared out over the city again, the skyline he had dominated for years suddenly feeling smaller, less certain. If this boy was truly his, if he had a son he had never known, then the life he had built on control and isolation might be a hollow victory. Ethan felt a pang of something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to regret. He had always prided himself on his ability to anticipate every possible outcome, to control every variable in his life. But this was a twist he had never seen coming. Ethan found himself sitting alone in his penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across the sleek, modern surfaces of his meticulously designed living space. The letter and photograph lay on the glass coffee table before him, silent yet screaming of a past he had long tried to forget. Despite the layers of armor he had built around his heart, the memories of Lila Hart had a way of piercing through, sharp and unforgiving. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and allowed the memories to wash over him. He had met Lila at a time when his world had been a chaotic scramble for success. She had been unlike anyone he had ever known, wildly creative, intensely passionate, and utterly uninterested in the trappings of wealth that he had so fiercely pursued. They had first crossed paths at a small, underground gallery opening in Soho, an event he had attended on a rare whim. urged by a college friend who had insisted that Ethan needed to experience something beyond stock portfolios and profit margins. He had been about to leave, unimpressed by the chaotic splashes of color on the walls, when he had seen her. Lila had stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her own paintings, her hands still streaked with oil and her hair loosely tied back in a careless knot. She had been arguing, no, debating passionately, with a fellow artist about the nature of creativity, her eyes blazing with conviction. Ethan had been captivated, struck by the way her words flowed like the strokes of a master's brush, each sentence a bold declaration of her beliefs. Without thinking, he had approached, drawn by a force he couldn't quite name. Their conversation had started with a casual observation about one of her pieces, a chaotic, swirling mass of reds and blacks that seemed to pulse with life, and had quickly spiraled into a deep, intense discussion about art, life, and the choices people make. Ethan had found himself challenged in a way he had not felt in years, his carefully constructed defenses slipping as Lila's fierce spirit cut through his polished exterior. Their connection had been instant and electric, a collision of two worlds that should never have intertwined. Ethan had been the calculated, ambitious businessman, driven by logic and numbers, while Lila had been the free spirit, painting her emotions onto canvases without a thought for consequence. For a brief, intoxicating moment, he had allowed himself to dream of a different life, a life where love and passion took precedence over profit and power. He had spent endless nights in her small, chaotic studio, watching as she brought her vibrant visions to life, her laughter echoing off the paint-splattered walls. She had dragged him to moonlit walks through the city, spontaneous road trips to forgotten corners of the country, and quiet mornings in hidden cafes, where they whispered secrets over bitter coffee. But as his business empire grew, the pressures mounted. Board meetings replaced midnight strolls, investor calls drowned out whispered confessions, and the clean, ordered lines of his spreadsheets slowly pushed out the wild chaos of her paintbrushes. He had begun missing their dates, canceling plans at the last minute, his focus shifting back to the world he knew best, the world of power and control. Lila had noticed, of course. She had felt the distance growing, the way he had begun to shut her out, turning their passionate love into a side project, a fleeting distraction. The arguments had started slowly, with hurt looks and tense silences, and then exploded into fiery confrontations that left them both raw and exhausted. One night, after yet another missed dinner, Lila had confronted him in her studio, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You're disappearing, Ethan," she had said, her voice trembling as she wiped her paint-stained hands on a rag. "You're slipping into that world of glass and steel, and I'm losing you." He had tried to reassure her, promising that it was just a phase, that things would settle down once his business stabilized. But they both knew the truth. He was already slipping away, consumed by a hunger for power that left little room for anything else. Then, without warning, she had vanished. One day, her studio had been empty, her canvases removed, her brushes neatly packed away. She had left without a word, without a note, without so much as a whisper of goodbye. Ethan had searched for her, briefly, before his growing empire demanded his full attention once more. He had told himself that it was for the best, that he had dodged a distraction that might have cost him everything. But as he stared at the photograph of the boy now, he realized he had lost far more than he had ever imagined. The following morning, Ethan awoke with a sense of unease that clung to him like the fog drifting over the city skyline. He had spent the night in a restless haze, his mind replaying scenes from his past, the echoes of Lila's laughter blending with the harsh beeps of his stock trading screens. He had thought he had left that part of his life behind, buried beneath the cold glass and steel of his empire. But now, the mysterious letter and the haunting photograph of a boy with his eyes had cracked the foundations of his carefully constructed world. Ethan knew he couldn't simply ignore this revelation. He had built his life on certainty, on control, and on the belief that he could outmaneuver any obstacle. But this was something different, something deeply personal and unsettling. He had to confront it, to find the truth, whatever it might be. He dressed quickly, slipping into a charcoal gray suit that fit him like a second skin, every line sharp and precise, a perfect match for the man he had become. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he caught a glimpse of his own eyes, sharp, calculating, but with a flicker of something else. Was it fear? Regret? He forced the thought aside, grabbing his phone and heading for the elevator. As the doors slid shut behind him, sealing him off from the world, Ethan dialed Lucas Crane. The phone rang only once before the gruff, efficient voice of his head of security came through. "Lucas," Ethan began, his tone hard and focused. "Any progress on the lead I gave you last night?" There was a brief rustling on the other end, the sound of papers being shuffled, before Lucas spoke. "Yes, sir. I've started digging into Lila Hart's whereabouts. She's been off the radar for years, but I've found a few threads to pull. She was last registered as the owner of a small art studio in a coastal town upstate. She sold the property about a decade ago, shortly after you two parted ways." Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't realized how much he had hoped that Lila had simply moved on, perhaps married, started a family, found the happiness that had eluded him. But if she had been living quietly, raising a son in his absence, the guilt felt like a vice tightening around his heart. And the boy? Ethan pressed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "What do we know about him?" Lucas hesitated, the rare pause from the usually unflappable ex-intelligence officer sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "The boy, Alex Hart, appears to be a straight-A student at a local private school. Bright, well-mannered, with a talent for chess and mathematics. The same sharp mind you had at that age, sir." Ethan felt a surge of conflicting emotions, pride, fear, and a deep, unsettling sense of loss. A son, a flesh-and-blood connection to a world he had abandoned in his ruthless climb to the top. "Send me everything you have on them," Ethan ordered, his grip tightening on the phone. "I want every detail, where they live, who their friends are, how they spend their days. I need to know if this boy is truly mine." "Understood," Lucas replied, his voice crisp and professional. "I'll have a full report to you within the hour." Ethan ended the call and leaned back against the polished steel wall of the elevator, his heart pounding. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the bustling lobby of Sinclair Tower. He strode through the marble atrium, his polished shoes clicking against the polished floors, the eyes of his employees turning as he passed, their whispers trailing behind him like the faint rustle of leaves in a storm. As he stepped into the waiting limousine, Ethan felt the cold, familiar comfort of leather against his back, the soft hum of the engine as the driver eased the car into the flow of traffic. But this time, the luxury felt hollow, the power he wielded suddenly insignificant in the face of the unknown. For the first time in years, Ethan felt vulnerable, exposed. The king of the concrete jungle, the untouchable tycoon, shaken by the possibility that he had missed out on the most important deal of his life, the chance to be a father. The following day, Ethan found himself seated in the back of his limousine, the city blurring past in a swirl of steel and glass. The smooth leather of the seats, the faint hum of the engine, the soft, controlled climate, all the trappings of power and wealth, did little to ease the storm brewing inside him. He clutched the black envelope in his hand, the sharp edges pressing into his palm, a constant reminder of the chaos that had invaded his meticulously ordered life. Lucas had come through as promised. The security dossier had been delivered to Ethan's private office early that morning. The thick file now sat beside him, its contents a mix of grainy photographs, printed reports, and background checks. Ethan had skimmed the documents, his eyes drawn to every detail about Alex Hart, the boy who might be his son. The car slowed as it turned onto a tree-lined street in a quiet, upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The houses here were a far cry from the towering skyscrapers Ethan was used to. Charming, historic homes with wide porches and neatly manicured lawns, the kind of place that whispered of stability and family, two concepts that had always eluded him. Mr. Sinclair, his driver, Richard, said over the intercom. "We're approaching the address." Ethan straightened, slipping the envelope into his jacket pocket. His heart raced, a strange and unfamiliar sensation for a man who had built his life on control and precision. He glanced out the tinted window as the car pulled to a smooth stop in front of a small, white brick house with deep green shutters and a wooden swing hanging from the front porch. It looked ordinary, peaceful, a stark contrast to the cold, gleaming surfaces of his penthouse and the sterile glass walls of his corporate empire. Ethan stepped out of the car, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel walkway. He paused for a moment, drawing a deep breath, his senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sense of fresh-cut grass and blooming hydrangeas. He forced himself to walk forward, each step carrying him closer to a reality he had never prepared for. As he approached the house, the front door opened, and a small figure darted out, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The boy from the photograph, Alex, was standing just a few feet away, his bright blue eyes wide with surprise as he looked up at the tall, sharply dressed stranger on his doorstep. For a moment, the world seemed to slow. Ethan took in every detail, the boy's tousled dark hair, his lean frame, the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right, just like his own. Alex's eyes, so strikingly familiar, locked onto Ethan's, and a strange, electric connection sparked between them. The boy hesitated, glancing back toward the house, as if unsure whether to run back inside or confront the stranger in his driveway. Before Ethan could say anything, the front door swung open again, and a woman stepped out onto the porch, her movements swift and protective. It was Lila. Ethan's heart lurched. She looked different, older, with faint lines around her eyes and streaks of silver in her dark hair, but her fiery spirit was unmistakable. She froze for a moment, her eyes locking onto Ethan's, a flicker of shock and something dangerously close to fear flashing across her face. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of the trees overhead. Ethan took a step back, momentarily thrown by the raw, unfiltered emotion in her gaze. For the first time in years, he felt truly, utterly lost. Alex, still clutching his backpack, looked between his mother and the stranger on their walkway, confusion furrowing his brow. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat, tangled in a web of old memories, unresolved feelings, and the terrifying possibility that his life was about to change forever. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he stood frozen on the gravel path, his gaze locked with Lila's. She hadn't moved, her hand still clutching the doorframe, fingers gripping the worn, white-painted wood as if it were the only thing holding her upright. The sharp autumn breeze rustled the leaves overhead, sending a cascade of golden light across her face, highlighting the mixture of shock and guarded resolve in her eyes. For a moment, the years melted away, and he was back in that cramped, paint-splattered studio in Soho, watching her throw herself into her art with a passion that had both fascinated and terrified him. But this was not the same Lila. This woman had lines of worry etched into her face, a slight tension in her posture that spoke of years spent protecting something, or someone. Finally, she stepped forward, closing the gap between them with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes never leaving his. Alex lingered behind her, his young face twisted with a mixture of curiosity and confusion, his gaze darting between his mother and the imposing stranger in the tailored suit. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" Lila's voice was low, steady, but laced with a razor-sharp edge. It was the tone of a woman who had spent years building walls, both physical and emotional, to protect herself and her son from the ghosts of her past. Ethan forced himself to breathe, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. He had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, swaying entire markets with a single sentence. But in this moment, he felt utterly unprepared. "I received a letter," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. He pulled the black envelope from his pocket, holding it up between them like a fragile truce. "It said I have a son." Lila's eyes flicked to the envelope, her jaw tightening, the color draining slightly from her cheeks. She glanced back at Alex, who was now watching them with wide, questioning eyes, his small hands gripping the straps of his backpack. Ethan felt his heart twist. He hadn't even considered how this would look to the boy, an unexpected, sharply dressed stranger confronting his mother on their quiet front porch. Lila took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring as she met Ethan's gaze again, her eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and fear. "This isn't the place for this conversation," she said firmly, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "Not in front of him." She turned back to Alex, her expression softening in an instant, the harsh lines of tension melting into the gentle curves of a mother's love. "Alex, honey, why don't you head inside and start on your homework? I'll be in soon." The boy hesitated, his eyes darting between his mother and Ethan, his small frame stiff with uncertainty. "Mom?" he asked, his voice tinged with a fear Ethan felt deep in his bones. Lila smiled, though the effort was clearly strained. "It's okay, sweetie. I'll be right behind you." Alex gave a small, reluctant nod before stepping back inside, the screen door creaking as it swung shut behind him. Ethan watched as the boy's shadow disappeared down the hallway, his small, uncertain footsteps fading into the soft sounds of a quiet home. As soon as Alex was out of earshot, Lila turned back to Ethan, her eyes flashing with a fire he hadn't seen in years. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "What do you think you're doing, Ethan? Showing up here, unannounced, after all these years?" Ethan straightened, forcing himself to meet her glare, his mind scrambling for control. He had faced down hostile boardrooms, outmaneuvered ruthless competitors, but this was different. This was personal. "I deserve to know the truth, Lila," he replied, his voice firm but tinged with a desperation he hadn't expected. "Is he mine?" Lila's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of either striking him or collapsing under the weight of her own emotions. "You don't get to just show up and demand answers, Ethan," she shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. "You walked away. You left. You made your choice." Ethan felt the sting of her words, each syllable a reminder of the life he had chosen, the sacrifices he had made in the relentless pursuit of power. But now, faced with the reality of a son he had never known, he felt those choices unraveling around him, the foundations of his empire shaking beneath the weight of his own regrets. "Lila," he said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent tone, "please. I just need to know." Lila's eyes searched his face, her own expression torn between rage and a deep, aching sadness. She took a slow, shuddering breath before stepping back, her gaze hardening as she pointed toward the street. "Meet me at the park down the road," she whispered, her voice sharp as broken glass. 5 minutes. And don't let him see you." Without another word, she turned and stepped back into the house, the screen door slamming shut behind her, the sound echoing through the quiet, tree-lined street. Ethan stood there, his heart racing, his mind reeling, the black envelope still clutched in his hand. As he turned and walked back to his waiting car, he felt the familiar thrill of a battle about to begin. But this time, it wasn't a hostile takeover or a corporate war. This time, the stakes were far higher. This time, he was fighting for the truth. Ethan's mind raced as he made his way to the small park Lila had mentioned. It was just a few blocks from her house, a quiet, tree-filled oasis tucked between rows of quaint, historic homes. The sharp crunch of gravel under his shoes felt strangely loud in the calm, suburban silence, his polished leather soles starkly out of place against the well-worn paths and weathered benches. He reached the park's entrance and paused, his eyes scanning the winding pathways and scattered benches. A few children played on a rusting jungle gym in the distance, their laughter cutting through the cool autumn air. A pair of elderly women strolled along a nearby path, their small, fluffy dogs trotting beside them. Ethan felt a pang of discomfort, the normalcy of the scene jarring against the storm raging inside him. He spotted Lila near the small, man-made pond at the park center, her silhouette framed by the golden glow of the setting sun. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture stiff, her gaze fixed on the slow ripple of the water as if it held the answers to questions she had long tried to bury. Ethan approached slowly, his heart pounding with each step, the crisp, fallen leaves crunching underfoot. Lila didn't turn as he came up beside her, her eyes remaining on the water, her face set in a hard, unreadable mask. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt thick, weighted with the ghosts of a past neither had truly left behind. Ethan searched for the right words, the perfect opening line, but his mind, so sharp and strategic in the boardroom, felt clumsy and unsteady in the face of this deeply personal confrontation. Finally, Lila broke the silence, her voice low and tightly controlled. "Why are you here, Ethan? Why now, after all these years?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes tracing the curve of her profile, the way her jaw tightened as she spoke, the faint tremble in her hands that she tried to hide by gripping her arms tightly against her chest. She looked both furious and afraid, a combination that twisted his heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. "I had no idea," he said, his voice rough with the weight of his own disbelief. "I didn't know, Lila. I didn't even consider the possibility." She turned to face him then, her eyes sharp and accusing, a flare of anger lighting up the deep, stormy blue he remembered so well. "You never considered it?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the cool air like a blade. "You just walked away, Ethan. You made your choice, and you left me behind without a second thought." Ethan felt the sting of her words, each one a fresh wound, cutting through the layers of armor he had built around himself over the years. He wanted to argue, to remind her that she had disappeared without a word, but something in her expression, something raw and fragile, hidden behind the anger, held him back. "I was building something," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I thought I was doing the right thing, making a future for us, for the family I hoped we could have one day." Lila let out a bitter, humorless laugh, her eyes flashing with a mix of pain and disbelief. "A future," she repeated, shaking her head. "You were building an empire, Ethan, not a family. You were so focused on your precious company that you didn't even notice me slipping away." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, the harsh truth of her words striking him like a physical blow. He had been so consumed by his ambition, his relentless drive for success, that he had failed to see what he was losing in the process. "I should have told you," Lila said, her voice breaking slightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She looked away, her gaze fixed once more on the rippling surface of the pond. "I should have found a way to reach you, to make you see what was happening. But I was scared. I was angry. And by the time I realized what I had to do, it felt too late." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, a sharp, twisting pain that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. He took a small step closer, his hands twitching at his sides, desperate to reach out to her, to bridge the gap that had grown between them. "Lila," he whispered, his voice strained. "Is he mine?" Lila closed her eyes for a long moment, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep, shuddering breath. When she opened them again, the hardness in her gaze had softened, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow that cut through Ethan's defenses like a blade. "Yes," she said finally, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo through the quiet park. "Alex is your son." Ethan felt the world tilt around him, the ground beneath his feet shifting as the truth settled into his bones. A son, his son, the boy with his eyes, his sharp mind, his uncertain smile. The boy he had never known, the boy he had unwittingly abandoned. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything, that might bridge the chasm between them, but the words caught in his throat, choked off by a flood of emotions he hadn't realized he still possessed. Lila turned away, her arms tightening around herself as if to hold her breaking heart together. "I don't know what you want, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you can't just walk back into our lives and expect to pick up where we left off." With that, she stepped back, her silhouette framed against the fiery glow of the setting sun, and walked away, her footsteps crunching softly against the gravel path. Ethan watched her go, his heart pounding, his mind reeling, the image of her retreating figure seared into his memory. He had come looking for answers, but what he had found was a truth more complicated and heartbreaking than he had ever imagined. And as he stood alone in the cooling shadows of the park, Ethan Sinclair realized that his carefully constructed world had just shattered, and there was no going back. After Lila's retreating figure disappeared down the path, Ethan remained rooted to the spot, the gravity of the moment weighing heavily on his shoulders. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness growing inside him. The truth that Alex was his son settled deep into his bones, a reality both exhilarating and terrifying. He had spent his entire life building walls, between himself and the world, and now, between himself and a son he never knew existed. The revelation forced him to confront the consequences of his past decisions in a way no boardroom battle ever could. Driving back to his penthouse, Ethan felt a restless turmoil gnawing at him. His sleek car glided silently through the city streets, but inside, his mind was anything but calm. Memories flooded back, moments of laughter shared with Lila before ambition drove them apart, nights when he had wondered what might have been, and the gnawing ache of absence he had buried beneath work and wealth. He pulled into his building's underground garage and sat in silence, the leather seats cold beneath him. He reached for his phone, debating who to call first. Should he tell his closest confidant, his loyal business partner? Or was this a burden he had to bear alone, at least for now? His hand hovered over the screen, fingers trembling. But before he could decide, a soft chime announced a message. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me tomorrow. We need to talk, for Alex's sake." The cryptic message sent a fresh wave of uncertainty crashing over him. Was it Lila reaching out? Or someone else entirely, connected to the secret he was only beginning to unravel? That night, Ethan lay awake in the expansive silence of his penthouse. The city lights flickered far below, indifferent to the storm raging within him. He thought of Alex, a boy he had never held, never protected, but who was undeniably part of him. Determined, Ethan resolved to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful. He would uncover every hidden layer of this mystery, rebuild the bridges he had burned, and prove that he was willing to fight for the son he never knew he had. Because in the end, some truths were worth shattering everything for. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, the sky reflecting Ethan's restless mood. He stared at his phone, the cryptic message from the night before still glowing on the screen. His fingers hesitated, then tapped the reply button. "Who is this? What do you want?" Seconds stretched into minutes, each tick of the clock amplifying his anxiety. Then, a reply. "Meet me at Café Marlowe at noon. Come alone." Café Marlowe was a quiet, unassuming place tucked away in a side street, far from the glitzy high-rises and power players Ethan usually frequented. The kind of spot where secrets might be whispered without fear of prying ears. Ethan arrived early, his tailored suit slightly out of place amid the cafe's rustic charm. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of hushed conversations. He took a seat by the window, his eyes scanning every face that walked in, searching for the messenger of this unexpected summons. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a figure slipped inside, a woman in her late 30s, wearing glasses and a worn leather jacket. She hesitated when she saw Ethan, then approached his table with a cautious but determined stride. "Mr. Sinclair?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "Yes," Ethan replied, studying her closely. "Who are you?" "My name is Claire," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I'm connected to your past and your son." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Connected how?" Claire took a deep breath, pulling a small, folded envelope from her bag and placing it on the table between them. "I was with Lila when Alex was born. I helped her through some difficult times." The words hit Ethan like a thunderclap. A flood of questions surged through his mind. How much did this woman know? Why hadn't Lila told him about Claire? And most importantly, what was in the envelope? Claire hesitated, then slid the envelope closer. "This was left for you by someone who wanted you to have it when the time was right." Ethan's fingers trembled as he unfolded the paper inside. It was a letter, handwritten, the ink slightly faded but the message unmistakable. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means the truth can no longer be hidden. Alex is your son. I hope someday you'll find the courage to be the father he deserves. Lila." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The letter confirmed everything he had feared and hoped. But why now? Why after all these years? Claire's gaze softened. "There's more. Lila didn't want you involved until she was sure you were ready. But Alex needs you now. Things are changing, and the past is catching up." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling like a stone in his chest. This wasn't just about business deals or boardroom victories anymore. This was about family, about making right the mistakes of the past. He looked up at Claire, determination hardening his features. "Tell me everything." Claire leaned back in her chair, her eyes flickering with a mixture of caution and resolve. The quiet hum of Café Marlowe faded into the background as she began to unravel the tangled web of secrets Ethan had unknowingly stepped into. "Lila's life after you left wasn't easy," Claire started, voice low. "She tried to raise Alex on her own while keeping her distance from you. She never wanted to drag you into this world, your world of wealth and power, because she feared it would put Alex at risk." Ethan's fists clenched on the table. "Risk? What kind of risk?" Claire's gaze darkened. "There are people who would use Alex's connection to you for their own gain. Old enemies, people with grudges against the Sinclair family. Lila wanted to protect Alex from becoming a pawn in their games. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no idea his world had such dangerous shadows lurking in the corners. She kept everything secret, even from you, Claire continued. But lately, things have changed. Strange calls, unfamiliar faces near Alex's school, threats in the mail. Lila finally realized she couldn't protect him alone. The weight of Claire's words sank in. Ethan was a man who thrived on control, on having the power to shape his destiny. But here, in this small, unassuming cafe, he realized he had been powerless to protect the most important person in his life. Lila's health has been fragile, Claire added softly. She's scared, Ethan. She asked me to find you because Alex needs a father now more than ever. Ethan's mind raced. He was overwhelmed, but beneath the storm of emotions was a steel resolve that had built his empire. He would not let his son face these threats alone. What kind of threats? Ethan pressed. Claire hesitated, glancing around. There's a faction from your past, people who want to leverage your family's influence. They see Alex as the key to their ambitions. If they get to him first, it could ruin everything. The room seemed to close in around Ethan. Every deal, every victory, suddenly paled against the looming danger shadowing his son. I don't care about the business games anymore, Ethan said, voice steady but fierce. Alex is my priority now. Claire nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Then we have work to do. Ethan's world had been a fortress of glass and steel, towering above the city, untouchable and impenetrable. Yet now, the truth Lila and Claire revealed shattered that fortress, exposing vulnerabilities Ethan had never imagined. The threat to Alex was not just an abstract fear. It was immediate, tangible, and dangerous. After the meeting at Café Marlowe, Ethan returned to his penthouse with a heavy sense of responsibility pressing down on him. He couldn't afford to waste a moment. The son he had never known was out there, living a life shadowed by threats and fears, and it was his duty to protect him. Not as a distant billionaire with guarded walls, but as a father. His first call was to Marcus Hale, his longtime security chief and former Special Forces operative. Marcus had always been Ethan's shield in the business world, discreetly handling threats and crises with precision. Now, Ethan needed Marcus to extend that protection to a boy who represented a whole new battlefield. Marcus, I need you to mobilize immediately, Ethan said, voice steady but urgent. Alex Sinclair is under threat. I want a full security detail around him, at school, at home, everywhere he goes. Marcus was silent for a moment, weighing the gravity of the situation. Understood, sir. We'll move quickly. I'll assign the best operatives and ensure constant surveillance. We'll need to vet everyone close to Alex as well. Ethan exhaled sharply. He was used to wielding power through boardrooms and contracts, but now the stakes were personal. The idea of a boy, unaware of his father's existence for so long, suddenly thrust into a world of danger, stirred something deep inside Ethan, a protective instinct raw and fierce. Next, Ethan contacted Lila. Their conversation was tentative at first, weighed down by years of silence and regret. But beneath the awkwardness was a shared concern for Alex. Ethan, Lila's voice trembled slightly. Alex is scared. He doesn't understand why things have changed so suddenly. He might resist your involvement. I know, Ethan replied, his tone softening. But I'm here now. I want to be part of his life. I'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe. Lila sighed, a mixture of relief and apprehension. He's a good kid, Ethan. But this won't be easy. He's used to being on his own. You'll have to earn his trust. Ethan felt the weight of that promise settle over him. It wasn't just about physical protection. It was about rebuilding a fractured family, bridging years of absence and silence. He immediately set to work transforming Alex's life. The security team was discreet but thorough. Unobtrusive eyes followed Alex to school and back, analyzing every unfamiliar face and vehicle. Drivers were changed, routes altered. His penthouse was outfitted with the latest security tech, biometric locks, silent alarms, and private entrances. Ethan also hired a child psychologist and a private tutor, recognizing that Alex's emotional and educational needs were as vital as his physical safety. This wasn't just about shielding him from external threats. It was about creating a stable, nurturing environment where Alex could thrive despite the chaos. Despite the increased security, Ethan made it a point to spend time with Alex whenever possible. At first, the boy was wary, distant, a stranger in the lavish world Ethan inhabited. But Ethan's patience never wavered. He listened more than he spoke, letting Alex guide the pace of their growing relationship. One afternoon, while watching Alex practice basketball in the private gym, Ethan saw a flicker of something precious, a smile, genuine and unguarded. It was a small victory, but one that fueled Ethan's determination. Yet, beneath the surface, threats lingered. Strange calls persisted, and shadowy figures were spotted near Alex's school. Ethan knew the enemies they faced were relentless, and any misstep could have dire consequences. In quiet moments alone, Ethan wrestled with guilt and regret. Years lost, milestones missed. But he refused to dwell in the past. His focus was on the present and the future, a future where Alex was not just protected, but loved. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Ethan Sinclair was a man who never backed down. For his son, he would tear down every wall, confront every threat, and rewrite their story from the ground up. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption, family, and hope. The days following the implementation of Alex's security detail were intense, yet they marked the beginning of a new chapter for Ethan and his son. It was clear that protecting Alex physically was only the first step. Ethan now faced the greater challenge, rebuilding a relationship torn apart by years of absence, secrecy, and mistrust. At first, Alex was guarded, responding to Ethan's overtures with cautious silence or polite but distant replies. The boy had grown accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. Suddenly thrust into a life of luxury and protection, he struggled to reconcile the man claiming to be his father with the image of an absent stranger. Ethan understood this was no quick fix. He started by inviting Alex to simple activities, dinners without staff, walks in the park, and quiet afternoons watching movies at home. He was patient, refusing to rush the process, knowing the wounds were deep and healing would take time. Meanwhile, Ethan made a point to learn about Alex's interests, his favorite music, and even his dreams. It was a deliberate effort to connect on a personal level rather than just as a guardian or provider. Slowly, barriers began to fall. Lila, still cautious, watched from a distance, silently hopeful. She knew Ethan's intentions were genuine, but feared the risks of opening old wounds. Despite her reservations, she agreed to a tentative meeting with Ethan, mediated by Claire, to discuss Alex's future openly. The reunion was fragile but promising. Ethan apologized for his absence, expressing remorse not just for the lost years, but for the mistakes that led to their separation. Lila responded with guarded warmth, acknowledging his efforts and the sincerity in his voice. Together, they began to lay down new foundations, not just for Alex's safety, but for a family rebuilt from fractured pasts. They agreed on shared responsibilities and open communication, determined to protect Alex from external threats and the scars of their past. Ethan also opened up to his inner circle about the situation. His business associates were surprised, but supportive, understanding that family now took precedence over corporate battles. Slowly but surely, Ethan's world expanded beyond boardrooms and bank accounts. The billionaire who had once valued power above all else was learning the true meaning of family, connection, and love. And for the first time in a long time, hope blossomed. As Ethan and Lila began cautiously rebuilding their fractured family, new challenges emerged, threats from unseen enemies who were growing restless. The forces aligned against Alex weren't just faceless shadows. They were organized, calculated, and relentless. Protecting Alex required more than just security teams and private meetings. It demanded allies, people who could anticipate moves before they were made, who could infiltrate the dark corners where danger brewed. One evening, while reviewing surveillance reports, Marcus alerted Ethan to unusual activity in a neighborhood connected to Alex's school. Footsteps, unfamiliar faces watching from a distance, coded messages intercepted on encrypted channels, signs of a coordinated effort to gather information on the Sinclair family. "We need someone on the inside," Marcus said grimly. "Someone with local contacts and a personal stake in this." Ethan's mind raced. He knew of an old friend, Maya Torres, a former intelligence officer turned private investigator. Maya was resourceful, fearless, and fiercely loyal. qualities that made her a perfect ally for this shadow war. But there was history, complicated and unresolved, between her and Ethan. After some hesitation, Ethan reached out. Maya was initially skeptical, wary of stepping back into a world that had once betrayed her. But when Ethan shared the truth about Alex and the dangers looming, her resolve hardened. "This isn't just about business anymore," Maya said. "It's personal. I'm in." With Maya's expertise, they began piecing together the puzzle of their enemies, uncovering hidden agendas, bribed officials, and dangerous players with ties to Ethan's past corporate rivalries. Maya's network of contacts provided vital intelligence, allowing the Sinclair team to anticipate threats and stay one step ahead. Beyond her tactical skills, Maya's presence brought a new energy to Ethan's team, a mix of grit, intuition, and fierce determination. She wasn't just an ally. She became a trusted partner in the fight to keep Alex safe. For Ethan, this alliance was a turning point. It was no longer just about power or legacy. It was about trust, survival, and the strength found in unexpected friendships. Together, they prepared for the battles ahead, united by a shared goal: to protect Alex at all costs and confront the shadows threatening to destroy everything Ethan had fought to build. With Maya's involvement, Ethan's security measures became more strategic and proactive, but the enemies they faced were growing bolder and more dangerous. The tension in the Sinclair household escalated as subtle threats began escalating into overt acts of intimidation. One evening, as Ethan reviewed the latest intelligence reports in his home office, Marcus burst in, his face pale and eyes sharp. "Sir, there's been a breach near Alex's school. Someone tried to follow him home." Ethan's heart clenched. Despite all precautions, the danger was real and closing in fast. Maya's team intensified surveillance and tracked suspicious vehicles moving around the city. The fragmented pieces of the puzzle revealed a coordinated effort. The adversaries were not just after information, but were preparing for a direct confrontation. At the same time, Alex's behavior changed. The once guarded boy now seemed anxious, frequently looking over his shoulder and withdrawing from the rare moments Ethan shared with him. Ethan realized that the psychological toll was mounting, and protecting Alex wasn't just about physical safety. It was about preserving his spirit. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Ethan sat down with Alex. "I know this is hard, son, but I'm here. We're in this together." Alex nodded silently, eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and tentative trust. The next days were a whirlwind of tightening security and careful planning. Ethan and Maya identified key figures behind the threats, shadowy operatives tied to a rival conglomerate who saw Alex as a pawn to leverage power over the Sinclair empire. One chilling night, an attempt was made on Alex's life. A car chased his school bus, forcing Marcus's team to intervene just in time. The incident shook everyone to the core. Ethan realized the stakes had never been higher. This was no longer a distant threat. It was a battle for his son's life and the future of the family legacy. Determined, Ethan vowed to confront the threat head-on, drawing on every resource, ally, and ounce of strength he had. The war had begun, and failure was not an option. The night of the confrontation arrived like a storm, dark, tense, and inevitable. Ethan had gathered his closest allies, including Marcus, Maya, and Claire, in the war room of his penthouse, where screens flickered with surveillance feeds and maps marked with enemy movements. The air was thick with anticipation and steely determination. They had tracked the source of the threats to a secluded estate on the city's outskirts, a stronghold where the rival conglomerate's operatives were believed to be coordinating their attacks. Ethan knew this was their chance to strike back decisively and dismantle the network, endangering his son. The plan was meticulous, a coordinated raid under the cover of darkness, aiming to capture key players and seize critical evidence. Ethan insisted on being present, unwilling to stand on the sidelines while his son's safety hung in the balance. As the team moved in, tension crackled with every step. Inside the estate, armed guards patrolled, but Ethan's security forces moved swiftly and silently, neutralizing threats with precision. In the heart of the estate, Ethan confronted Damian Blackwell, the ruthless rival CEO whose greed had ignited this deadly game. Their eyes locked, the weight of years of rivalry and personal stakes exploding in that moment. "You won't win, Damian," Ethan said, voice cold but steady. "This ends tonight." Damien sneered, confident until the arrival of law enforcement officers summoned by Maya's team tipped the scales. The operation was a success, evidence secured, key operatives detained. Back at home, Ethan finally allowed himself a moment of relief. But more importantly, he saw Alex, not just as a son to protect, but as family to cherish. Their bond had endured the storm, and while the battle was far from over, they had taken the first step toward a safer, united future. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, a fragile peace settled over the Sinclair household. The immediate threats had been neutralized, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. For Ethan and Alex, the journey toward healing was just beginning. Ethan dedicated himself not only to rebuilding their family, but to understanding the boy he had missed out on for so long. He saw Alex's struggles, the lingering fear, the moments of doubt, and the cautious hope that slowly started to bloom. They began to spend more time together, away from the prying eyes of security and the chaos of corporate battles. Weekend trips to quiet countryside retreats, late-night talks over pizza, and simple shared laughter helped to mend the wounds. Slowly, Ethan became not just a protector but a father in the truest sense. Lila, witnessing the change, found a cautious optimism as well. Though their past was complicated, they started communicating openly for Alex's sake, forging a co-parenting partnership grounded in mutual respect and care. Meanwhile, Ethan made efforts to address the emotional toll with professionals, therapists and counselors who helped Alex process the trauma and learn to trust again. The billionaire who had once focused solely on power now understood the deeper strength of vulnerability and connection. The media buzz quieted as the story faded from headlines, giving them space to heal in privacy. Ethan's company stabilized under his steady leadership, now infused with a new purpose, building a legacy not just of wealth, but of family. As spring blossomed over the city, so did their renewed lives. Though shadows of the past lingered, hope, bright and resilient, guided them forward. Ethan looked at Alex one evening, gratitude swelling in his chest. The hidden son who had once been a mystery was now his greatest joy and reason to fight. The sun rose on a new chapter in Ethan Sinclair's life, one marked not by boardroom conquests or corporate dominance, but by family, love, and the promise of tomorrow. The battles had been fierce, the losses painful, yet through it all, something precious had emerged, a chance to rebuild, to start anew. Alex, once a stranger, was now firmly woven into Ethan's world. The boys' laughter echoed through the halls of the penthouse, a sound that had once been absent for far too long. They shared not just blood but moments, simple, profound, and healing. Ethan had transformed too. The man who once measured success in profits and power now found his greatest fulfillment in the quiet moments with his son. He made a vow, not only to protect Alex, but to be present in every step of his journey. Lila remained a steadfast partner in this new chapter. Their past, once shadowed by pain and secrets, now served as a foundation for co-parenting built on trust and respect. Together, they navigated the complexities of blending their lives, always prioritizing Alex's happiness and well-being. In the business world, Ethan's reputation grew, not just as a shrewd billionaire, but as a man who overcame personal trials and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. His philanthropic efforts expanded, focusing on causes close to his heart, including youth mentorship and education, inspired by his son's resilience. The threats that once loomed large had faded, quelled by justice and vigilance. Yet Ethan knew vigilance was eternal. The past had taught him that peace was a precious, fragile gift. One evening, as Ethan and Alex sat watching the city skyline, the boy turned to him and smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile. In that moment, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The journey had been arduous, but the destination was worth every struggle. This was more than a new beginning. It was a legacy reborn. And as the lights of the city twinkled below, Ethan Sinclair knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter what the future held, they would face it together. Ethan Sinclair's journey from a lonely billionaire to a devoted father is a powerful reminder that no amount of wealth can replace the priceless bond of family. Through trials, secrets, and unexpected revelations, he discovered that true strength lies not in power or fortune, but in love, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional and thrilling journey. If this story touched your heart or inspired you in any way, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more unforgettable tales right to your screen. Together, let's keep exploring the incredible power of human connection. Until next time, take care and keep believing in new beginnings.